event today, you consent to it being recorded and disseminated online after the event. Yeah, just a couple of reminders that to please keep your microphone muted and your camera switched off unless you're sort of intervening or given the floor to speak. And we'll also be making use of the Q&A function on Teams later on in the discussion, so do familiarize yourself with that. And then, of course, if you want to share your views throughout the event on social media, make sure you use the hashtag CBTalk5 and tag at UNFCCC to make sure that we see what you have to say and your thoughts, and that you're engaged throughout the discussions. And we can move on to the next slide already. I don't see too many people introducing themselves. Oh, there we go. Hello, Edmund. Welcome. Don't be shy and do share your introductions in the chat. And in the meantime, I will sort of give you a little bit of some information on the background of this event and what to expect for the next hour and a half. So this fifth CB talk is part of the Capacity Building Talk series, which is hosted by the UNFCCC Secretariat to really facilitate the sharing of knowledge and information among stakeholders working on climate change related capacity building. And so the idea of these talks is sort of bringing together different stakeholders with the hopes of strengthening the focus on work and capacity building within the UNFCCC process. So for our fifth talk of the series today, we've chosen the topic, as I was mentioning in the beginning, enabling youth as agents of change, building youth capacities for climate action and implementation. And throughout the discussions and the sessions today, we'll be sort of looking at the crucial role that young people play in delivering ambitious climate action and in shaping the way in which they empower other young people, but also really recognizing the need to invest in young people and to contribute to building their capacities and skills so that they can empower, other young people and their own communities and unlock youth-led climate action. So really also recognizing the role that young people play as capacity builders in the process. So yeah, as I mentioned, really acknowledging that youth are not only capacity recipients, but also capacity builders, and sort of how the two connect and come into place. And so to sort of look at that in the discussions, we'll be having a panel discussion with four of our distinguished panelists today. We'll be doing 3 rounds of questions. And the idea of this panel discussion is really to exchange knowledge and best practices on capacity building initiatives that seeks to meaningfully engage youth in climate action and boost youth-driven climate solutions. And then, of course, we'll open the floor to all of you to share your thoughts and experience. And then we'll sort of wrap up the session with a Q&A where you'll be able to ask any burning questions that you may have to the panelists. So speaking of initiatives that contribute to building the capacities of young people in climate change, while also engaging young people in the process as capacity builders, I would like to hand it over to my colleagues, Rudy Dutta from the Capacity Building Subdivision, and my colleague Hyunjin Chang, to provide a bit of, to start it off really with a bit of a presentation on this Youth for Capacity initiative, which is set up by the UNFCCC Secretariat and the Ministry of Ecological Transition of Italy. So over to you, Rudy and Hyunjin, for this scene-setting presentation.
Thanks so much, Eva, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be a part of the fifth capacity building talk. This is one of those events within our subdivision that is much celebrated. The topics are always very diverse, and I think specifically with this one, there's a lot of interest across the Secretariat, given that it's the topic of youth. So as Eva rightly mentioned, I think across our work, the capacity building team's work, we've seen that young people are not just capacity recipients, they're also capacity builders. So recognizing this role and further contributing to this role and further building the capacities of young people, this June, the Ministry of Ecological Transition of Italy and the UN Climate Change Secretariat embarked on a journey to support the design and implementation of this new initiative initiative called the Youth for Capacity Initiative. So it started off with a memorandum of understanding between the two entities, and we are now in the very early stages of sort of designing and implementing this initiative. So this program is set out to be a 5-year program which seeks to support in enhancing the capacities of young people in the climate action space, while also acknowledging that young people are equal partners and co-creators of such capacity building efforts. And to meet this objective, what we are hoping to do is to design and implement 4 kind of activities. You see them on the screen right now. Started from targeted virtual knowledge and skill enhancement events like webinars, training sessions, then in-person and hands-on capacity building events, including at the Regional Climate Weeks and other related events organized by the Secretariat. The third thing being a mentorship program, as well as the fourth one, which is my personal favorite one, is the outreach bit of it, because as young people, we're very snazzy on social media. And I think it's about making this intersection of the capacity building landscape and the role of young people in it trending and viral, if I can say that. So yeah, I guess that's what the objectives of this entire initiative is for the next 5 years. And this is what we're looking to do. We can go to the next slide. Yes, there we go. So the topic of young people and capacity building, climate action, role of young people is prominent across the work of the Secretariat through all of our processes and mandates. And this initiative also seeks to sort of coordinate all of these efforts. So while this started off through the contribution of Italy and UNFCCC being the delivery partner for it, I think we are working very closely with our colleagues from the Action for Climate Empowerment, the ACE team, so Hanjan will be speaking more to it, but also with other constituted bodies. For example, the Paris Committee on Capacity Building does a lot of work with youth, and its network, the PCCB network, does a lot of work with youth as well. So we want to sort of coordinate all of these efforts and deliver them together to the Youth for Capacity Initiative. But for now, what I will do is pass over to Hanjan to speak more of from the ACE perspective and in terms of this collaboration that we are doing within the Secretariat for the Youth for Capacity Initiative. Thanks, Eva. Over to you, Hanjan.
Thank you, Eva and Ridi. And as introduced, I'm from the Action for Climate Empowerment team. And for those who are not familiar with the term, Action for Climate Empowerment, or ACE, refers to Article 6 of the Convention and Article 12 of the Paris Agreement. And it covers activities from climate change education, public awareness to training, and also from public access to information to public participation. So youth is a very important cross-cutting focus for ACE. And the Glasgow Work Programme on ACE adopted last year at COP26 recognized that the critical role of youth as agents of change and encouraged governments to build the capacity of youth in implementing climate action. So with the growing interest and support for youth capacity building, it is also very important, as Ridi mentioned, to strengthen our internal coordination and coherence on building the capacity of the youth. So ACE team is very excited to be working closely with the capacity building subdivision in designing and delivering the Youth for Capacity program. And the two teams, together with our Children and Youth Observer Constituency, Yango, as well as many other local and regional youth organizations, have already jointly organized a youth-led event during the Africa Climate Week, where we officially launched the Youth for Capacity program. And if you scan the QR code on the slide, you can read the very detailed output report from the youth event, where the launch of the capacity program itself is recorded. So we hope to work closely with partners within and outside the Secretariat in building the capacity of young people through this Youth for Capacity program. So very much looking forward to the discussion today and our collaboration for the next few years. I'll hand the floor back to Eva. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ridi and Hanjin, for the great presentation. And we hope this sort of provided our audience with a bit of an overview of the initiative. And we definitely want to seek your inputs later on through the discussions on how the initiative can complement existing capacity building programs and to learn more about the future of the initiative. So now we can jump right in onto the panel discussion. I'll hand it over to Natalie Mangondo, who's a Finance Youth Fellow in the UN Climate Change High-Level Champions team. She's also an economist, pursuing a Master of Science in Economics from the University of Zimbabwe, and supports Yango, the youth constituency of the UNFCCC, as a volunteer on the Finance and Markets Working Group. And she'll be moderating the panel discussion today, where we'll be sort of delving more into the topic and sort of exploring different capacity building initiatives for youth and led by youth. So over to you, Natalie.
Perfect. Thank you so much to you, Eva, and to the UNFCCC Capacity Building and Action for Climate Empowerment teams for delivering those really incredible context-setting opening remarks. Today, we're honored to have 4 distinguished guests who will be engaging in a panel discussion that will take place over the next 40 minutes, after which we'll invite the audience to engage with the panelists through an open plenary discussion, as well as a Q&A session. So as Eva said earlier, please do use the Q&A function on Teams to pose your questions to the panelists, and the panelists will have the opportunity to respond to them later on. Due to time constraints, I kindly request that our lovely panelists keep each intervention to 2 to 3 minutes, if possible, so that we can hear a diverse range of perspectives and have a really engaging conversation. So without further ado, first we will hear from Bruno Elias, who is part of the Global Operations team at the United Nations Global Compact, where she leads efforts around business and SDG innovation. She oversees the SDG Innovation Accelerator Program for Young Professionals, which is a development program designed to foster a new community of emerging leaders disrupting traditional ways of doing business and spearheading change for true SDG impact. Thank you so much for joining us, Bruna. In the context of the accelerator, I'd like to ask you, how does the program really address the capacity needs and gaps experienced by young people?
Yes, thank you so much, Natalie, and thanks again for this opportunity. I'm very happy to be with you today. So as a recap, the Accelerator program is intended for young professionals. And when we say young professionals, we mean under the age of 35, who are working at UN Global Compact companies. And we do ask them throughout the period of this accelerator, which is 9 months, to come up with a solution that is proper to their own company, that has a social value, but also a market value. So in order for them to do this, at first, when they join the program, they have absolutely no idea what they are going to come up with at the end of the program. But we really do build their capacities from the very simple topics of sustainability and what it means to business. What does it mean for a business to be sustainable, and for their own company where they are working, how they can say that, hey, my company is sustainable. What does it mean practically? But then also we do build their capacity on topics related to breakthrough innovation, the breakthrough mindset, how to disrupt from within, because we really know that disruption happens not only in social spaces or other spaces that we know of, but also within companies and businesses. And this is really the mandate of the Global Compact, to be working closely with those companies and show that disruption happens from within. So other capacity building topics and things that we do really work on are also, what are those social problems that we face today in our world, and how can business step up and challenge those problems? How can business come up with solutions? It's not always those activists and nonprofits that are really working to make a social impact, but businesses too. And those young professionals working at those businesses can be the change agents. So we really walk them through a design thinking approach to the breakthrough mindset, but also disruptive innovations and technologies, and how we use those technologies in today's modern world for social impact. Specifically, when we talk about the climate change arena, which is all those new technologies related to low carbon heating and cooling, agri-tech, all our bio-based materials, water stewardship. So it's really important for those professionals working to really understand the importance of technology, the importance of those innovations, but also how to use them for social good. And this is practically how we do build their capacities throughout the accelerator, and we do create those change agents.
That's really amazing, Bruna, and I love the idea of a breakthrough mindset. Moving on, we'll hear from Hannah Gerardo. Hannah is the Gender and Youth Associate for the NDC Partnership. She works to support countries in advancing gender equality and meaningful youth engagement throughout the NDC process. Her work focuses on supporting progress on the partnership's gender strategy and youth engagement plan. So thank you so much for being here, Hannah. I'd like to ask you, since the NDC partnership seeks to design youth-inclusive NDC processes at the country level, support the development of youth-led NDC implementation projects, strengthen climate change capacity building for young people, as well as encourage youth participation in the global NDC partnership activities, how does this work really address how does this work to address the capacity needs and gaps experienced by young people?
Thank you so much, Natalie. So excited to be here with everyone today. Yes, as you mentioned, the NDC partnership has a youth engagement plan, but I want to take a quick step back and just note that it truly is a partnership. So we bring together more than 200 members. Right now, that includes around 115 countries, developed and developing, as well as 80 institutions. So all of these entities working on more ambitious climate action to achieve the Paris Agreement. So when I'm speaking about the partnership, I'm also speaking about the efforts of all of our partners, including country governments, as well as folks like UNDP, UNFCCC, UNICEF, and the list goes on. But within our youth engagement plan, we encourage members, as you mentioned, to do a couple of different activities to strengthen youth engagement. One of those is to offer and provide capacity building opportunities for young people as kind of a critical component of their NDC processes. So through our work as the partnership, we receive requests for support from countries, and we have an interesting knowledge portal or management tool that allows us to kind of look across the scope of those requests. So it's an interesting insight into what governments see as their capacity development needs. And these make up quite a large percentage, but unfortunately of the ones that focus on youth in particular, that percentage is fairly small when you look at all of the other requests. But I think they're interesting to note. So these include activities such as creating reskilling programs for youth to promote digital skills and e-learning technologies in schools. Some countries ask for support for building the capacity of young people to work on and verify carbon credit projects, so bringing them into carbon markets, or training young people to be involved in monitoring and negotiation and participation in climate action, whether it's at kind of the global level or at a national level, as well as things like conducting teacher training. So how are we helping educators bring additional capacity to their profession? And of course, these vary, region to region, country to country, but I think there are general gaps around climate change education. That's a topic that comes up that countries are really interested in elevating. Also, kind of the technical skills needed for economic transition. So whether that's workforce development or job training in sectors like renewable energy. But especially also around climate finance. That's something that we've been thinking about a lot and was the focus of our annual Youth Engagement Forum this year, which was a 3-day session virtually, but also explicitly hosted capacity building sessions or teach-in sessions after each day of the forum. I think it's interesting to focus on climate finance as one piece of this large puzzle that we're all grappling with. And from the forum, we heard things from participants around their needs and their needs for resources and capacity, such as financial literacy. How can we be amplifying education around what this financial sector means to day-to-day life, how to interact with it, how to focus on specific aspects of it, as well as things like making sure local language translation is available or there's internet access. So like fundamental building blocks that capacity requires. And then also the need to work really closely with governments and existing institutions. So how are we bringing young people into negotiations, into programming? How are governments kind of formalizing some of these initiatives that they've started in some places, and bringing in not just funding, but attaching kind of mentorship and sponsorship and things like accelerator programs in addition to the finance. So lots more, but I'll stop there for now. Thanks.
Yes, I mean, of course, the NDC partnership truly is a huge partnership in working on so many different things. I'd like to hear from Saad, who is a London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine public health master's graduate and activist. He's occupied leadership positions for 3 years in the International Federation of Medical Students Associations and led global campaigns and coordinated the Global Medical Students COVID-19 response, collaborating with World Health Organization, UNFPA, UNESCO, UNICEF, and many more. He now works with AIC as the North Africa coordinator, as well as being the program co-lead of the COP27 Children and Youth Pavilion. So AIC, which is of course the African Youth Initiative on Climate Change, really seeks to develop capacity and strong partnerships among African youth. And so for you, Saad, I'd like to ask, what are some examples of capacity building programs in AIC, and what capacity needs and gaps need to be addressed for young people across Africa?
Definitely, thank you very much. And yeah, great to share some reflections, especially from the continent background. You know, when for the past year I've been engaging with young people in the continent and also in the global level, working on supporting the communication and listening to their needs and issues. Usually, especially when it comes to people who are there in the ground, in the grassroots, are working and trying to, you know, create, take the lead, make impact. Those people, there are some multiple gaps that we usually identify for those people, because for AIC, for example, the priority or the vision of the network is to unite and build the capacity and support young people that are in the grassroots in the continent, link them with each other so that, and also empower them so that they can learn the tools that are needed to kind of be active advocates, both locally and also on the global level. So some of the challenges that we kind of noticed is, first, the people who are there in the grassroots, they sometimes lack the skills to make concrete, you know, programming work, especially when we talk about partnerships with, let's say, international like money makers or fundraisers or companies or foundations. And when we talk about big budgets with big, you know, numbers, usually those local people, they lack the capacity to deal with such budgets. So organizational.
Saad, I think we might have lost you. Saad, can you hear me?
Yeah, I was just cut for a second. I was saying that, you know, those kind of skills that are related to programming and making things happen, those are, you know, what young people need that are at the local level to take their work to the next step, you know, to elevate and be able to benefit from more opportunities. We have a lot of grants, a lot of opportunities, but then if people don't have the capacity, they're not able to share and benefit from those. So that's the first thing, building this and strengthening the organizational capacity for those young people, helping them, mentoring them and supporting them so that their local organizations, they have the structure and they have the ways to grow, to do professional work on the local level. They are doing already amazing and inspiring work, creative work. So we need to take them to the next level and support them to connect with stakeholders on the global level and be able to benefit from those opportunities. So that's the first one. The second challenge is, how can we make the link between those local people that are in the ground on the marginalized level and what's going on the global level? That includes bringing people to COPs, bringing people to different international spaces, and also creating the conversations where we mentor those young people and tell them about what's happening in those global spaces. We, raise the awareness, and now UNFCCC and Yongo is also doing that, for example. So raising the awareness on what's going on, and then telling them that, okay, those are the spaces. This is what you should know as young people, and then this is how you can engage, so that we can have more people that are at the local level present in those spaces, share their inputs throughout different consultation mechanisms and involve them. So that's the second area which we really need to reduce the gap between what's happening at the local level and taking it and sharing it in those global spaces, and also improving the literacy of young people in those spaces. And for that, we also try to engage with different capacity building programs in the continental level by first doing mentorship session, is like linking young people that have been there in those spaces with young people that are in the ground from the region or from the countries, so that they can mentor each other, share their experiences, experience sharing. And that's a very good practice, especially when you have people from the same country sharing their experience and saying that, okay, I've been there and I'm similar to you, so you can also be motivated and do the same. So mentorship is a big focus for us. And then there's also something we work on, is trying to link those young people with each other and have sharing practices. So both Africans with each other, and also people from other continents, where we can, interact with them, know what's happening there in their countries and regions, and learn from what's going on the local and global levels. So again, talking about building the organizational capacity, empowering young people for preparing them for the global level. So those are the two priorities that we try to focus on right now.
Absolutely, peer-to-peer learning and then taking it to that global stage is very key. So thank you for sharing that. Finally, we'll hear from Katerina, who's an architect by training. She works on international projects related to urban metabolism, circular economy, and vulnerable settlements regeneration. Her goal is putting into practice the experience that she gained first in Europe and then in Latin America about systemic design, management, and research to contribute to the urgency of climate change adaptation and mitigation and the sustainable development of cities. So, Katerina, you're an alumni of the Impulse South Solutions Lab Climate Leadership Program, which seeks to support the implementation of key climate initiatives led by young leaders from different sectors in 6 different countries. How have you really benefited from this program in the context of addressing this capacity needs and gaps?
Yes. Thank you very much, Natalie. Hi, everyone. I think, well, I just finished this program about climate governance with Impulse South, and now we started the Climate Solution Lab, which follows, let's say. And I think one of the most interesting parts of this program is that we have a lot of technical knowledge. So I work with circular economy and with strategic urban planning, but very often we lack of other knowledge, like legal framework or financing tools. So I think it's essential for us to have a training on these aspects, because, I mean, all these climate solutions are, or at least like this, when we work with strategic planning or systemic projects, it requires, like, they're so complex. They require a lot of different types of technical knowledge. So a lot of minds that come together to build up the project. And very often, the challenge is that we don't know where to start, because it's so complex that we find barriers all over, so it's very hard to know. So how do we, what is the starting point? And I think, okay, I think this lab is very relevant, because it gives us it helps us to break down the process somehow and take every step and look at it with a loop, and then see, okay, we need to start from here, and then we need to go there, and then how do we address the stakeholders? How do we engage them? And I think so. This is the main, the biggest opportunity for me in this sense. Which, I mean, we learn how to design the projects, but then it's from the bigger vision, let's say, go to a pilot project. It's a very long journey, you know. So I think that's the most valuable thing, I would say.
Absolutely. And, you know, this convening, this interrelatedness, this complexity, it can at the same time be a challenge, but it's also such a great opportunity once you're able to convene all those various actors to really make a systemic shift. So thank you for that reflection. Now, moving on to the second question, I'd like to ask each of our panelists, based on their experience with their respective capacity building programs, how youth capacities can be effectively built and retained in the long term. And this time, I guess I'll start with Saad for a 2-minute reflection on how to build and retain youth capacities. Oh, Saad, are you here? Okay, let me ask Katerina, because she's on my screen. Please let us know how to build and retain capacities in the long term.
Hello, am I?
Oh, I think.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. So yeah, I'll quickly think about this. You know, when we talk about the long-term capacity, it's about establishing systems on the local level that will allow continuity and growth.
So your network is kind of bad, so we will come back to you. Perhaps we can hand over to Katerina.
For you.
Katerina, are you there? Please go ahead.
Yes. Okay. So I think the key to build capacity in the long term, in my case at least, is to dedicate space for the educational component within the project. You know, every project I design, every strategy I design, I would say almost 50% of it is dedicated to education. So when I work with, in this case, in the climate solution lab, when we work with waste management, you know, in my case, we design a strategy. We have to involve a educational component for the project is dedicated.
Can you please, I please remind all participants to mute their microphones? Please go ahead, Katerina.
So I think, yeah, this project is involving kids and waste management in schools and transformation of the waste through educational gardens, for instance, you know. And so I dedicated in this project, let's say, half of it to approaching the families, but overall designing educational program for the kids to include, for instance, environmental awareness in the school program since primary school, for example. But in any way, I think also in the case of waste, as I am based in the Dominican Republic, and women are also in charge of managing well, they are in charge of the household most of the time, so the program addresses both kids and women, trying to transform them into ambassadors so that they can spread the knowledge to their family and their whole network and surroundings, so they can so we plant one seed and then they let it grow. I think that's a key component.
Absolutely. So perhaps we can hand over to Bruna on her reflections of building and retaining capacity. Bruna?
Yes, thank you, Natalie. And I really do agree with Katerina. It's exactly the same for our program at the UN Global Compact, because while the program really aims to target corporate behavior change, we will really focus on the way we change the way employees view the SDGs in relation to their business. Of course, as I said, the tangible outcomes of our program are to come up with a new idea, product, solution, business model, but the long-term objective of the program is to stimulate breakthrough shifts in the way those companies and those young people think. And I think whenever we're really trying to think of the long-term solution for those capacity building programs, it's important to note the long-term objective of those young professionals. Why are they doing this? Those young people, why are they here? What are they looking to gain? And really try to build this strategic and be super strategic about it, this cycle of building the capacity of those young professionals and youth, and making sure that in turn, we're creating a systemic shift in their environment, in their company, in their communities, and they will be in turn capacity builders in the future. And we always talk about, especially at the UN Global Compact and in businesses, in this new bottom-up approach. We no longer really talk about those strategic visions that come from the top and that tell us what we need to do. It's also a co-creation approach. This is something that we're really bringing to the table in today's age. We no longer talk about young professionals and youth as beneficiaries. We talk to them as partners. And when we're really involving all those young professionals and people in this co-creation process, we will be able to retain them, but also to build their capacities effectively and on the long term. And we really do know that we're going to reap the benefits in a certain time period, because they will be in turn change agents in the future. So again, the notion of co-creation is extremely important. And I know, and I'm sure that, and this is something that we always struggle with. I've also worked in the development work. We always want an answer, where to start, what do we want to do, how do we want to do this? But truth is that we already have the answers, and the answers is within our partners and the people who will benefit from this program. So I think also listening to those young professionals and the youth in particular, and engaging them in the process is a crucial aspect of this long-term delivery that we're looking at.
Absolutely. Totally in alignment, Bruna. Hannah, I'd like to hear from you about building and retaining capacities in the long term for youth.
Absolutely. Thank you. And yes, I'm completely in agreement with all the thoughts that have come just now. Really appreciate the concept of co-creation and using this bottom-up approach. Maybe just to kind of solidify that, I think a really key component to the long-term success is from a more of a national kind of government institutional perspective, prioritizing capacity building in NDC action. There's a lot of priorities that are pulling on governments trying to implement their NDCs and make their climate action more ambitious. But I think this needs to be a core component, a core priority, and also formalized. So we're not just doing kind of one-off events, but that this is baked into actions and part of meaningful engagement with young people especially. But I think the same applies to gender mainstreaming and bringing in other potentially vulnerable communities or working with indigenous communities or rural populations. There needs to be a meaningful programming around capacity building. And maybe just a couple quick points. I think it's really important to, in that same vein, make these efforts applicable to local levels. We saw a recent example of this with one of our country members, the Bahamas. This summer had hosted a capacity building effort around their regional conference of youth. And where it was possible, the sessions were really focused on the regional needs of the Caribbean to better understand and ground the sessions in local needs, important sectors to the economy and cultural aspects too. And the group that was hosting these sessions, the Young Marine Explorers, also offers events like citizen science projects to take communities and ground their awareness about marine environments in local conservation efforts and immediate surroundings. So I think that's another really key aspect to ensure kind of the longevity of these efforts. And then maybe I'll just end quickly with bringing it back to education. So I mentioned some of our country partners are really interested in expanding their school curriculum and enhancing the capacity of teachers. And I think that's a really key element that needs to be discussed as we're talking about long term, because as you're incorporating this level of climate change awareness into curriculum starting at a very young age, but also all the way up to university and higher education, that's how you have whole generations of young people that are invested and knowledgeable and can take all of those skills into whatever sector they choose to join, whatever, if it's private sector, if it's science, if it's business, etc. So I'll end there, but yeah, love having this conversation.
Thank you so much, Hannah, for your incredible insights. We truly appreciate them. Saad, are you able to speak now on building and retaining long-term capacity for youth?
Yes, am I hearable?
Yes, you are. If you can just give us a brief reflection on that.
Sure, maybe, not to be long and to just add on what has been said. Systemic approach and concretizing things in the systemic level is a must, both for those youth organizations having capacity building as a core priority in their strategic plan, and also for different stakeholders, including the government, schools, and having climate education as a core component there. SDG 4.7 is also something to focus on. So that's number one. And then also networking and uniting is a must. And someone spoke about the multi-sectoral and the whole of society approach, which is a must. So youth working together, supporting each other by the capacity, and also working with different stakeholders which can help them build that capacity. So those are the two ways for me to kind of make sure capacity is there on the long term.
Thank you so much, Saad. Short but very impactful and very insightful. So I'd like to ask our panelists, based on what we've discussed, how can the Youthful Capacity initiative that was introduced at the start of this conversation effectively complement and support existing youth-led capacity building programs in order to maximize synergies and avoid fragmentation that we often see? Saad just spoke about networking and uniting. So how do we ensure that we maximize these synergies? I'll start with you, Bruna.
Yes, I'll also be very super short and very simple. I'm a true believer in the 80-20 principle or rule, that we can achieve so much more with so much less effort, time, and resources. And if we simply just identify and focus our efforts. We live in a time of scarcity, so we obviously don't have a lot of time, effort, and resources, all the entities present here, but we kind of have the same goal. We might have different mandates, but our goal is the same, and we're delivering for the exact same people. And I think if we really pinpoint our collaborate on this instead of
sorry, yeah, it just dropped off, but please continue.
It's okay. No, I was just saying that if we could just identify our strength in a certain way and try to leverage this instead of building other accelerator programs and other programs that have kind of the same idea or the same stakeholders, because at the end of the day, again, we're all working together towards the same goal. I think that the expertise that the capacity building program that you have, particularly when it comes to climate action, is something that is very needed. For us at the UN Global Compact, we have this access to the private sector and those young professionals and youth who want to be advocate for this, but really lack this expertise in those specific topics. So I think if we could collaborate on this and make something happen, this is where we truly harvest, the impact of the collaboration that we always talk about, the power of partnership and the power of collaborations, even in the common agenda that we all have.
Absolutely. And before I move over to Hannah, I'd just like to remind our participants to please drop your Q&As in the Q&A box, because they will be addressed later. So if you have any questions for our incredible panelists on capacity building, please do drop them in the Q&A box. So over to you, Hannah, on how we maximize synergies and avoid fragmentation.
Thank you. Yeah, I completely agree with Bruna that there's a need to kind of continue increasing partnerships and collaboration. There's so much work being done out there that could be connected and strengthened. And I would add governments to that list. I think there's a need to be building bridges so that all of the work being done is translated into policies and kind of amplified. And maybe that's how the local is brought up to the national, to the global scale as well. And using local networks. I think, groups like AYICC, I'm not sure the pronunciation of the acronym, are so important in connecting folks across regions and really bringing local or national chapters to these conversations. Maybe one other point is to use the resources that are available already. The NDC partnership hosts a knowledge portal and a climate toolbox of resources, products, courses from across our partnership. There's platforms like the UNFCCC Learn courses online. So where do these resources exist that just need amplification? So we're not kind of recreating some things that are already out there, but rather focusing on building the frameworks and the networks and the platforms that are needed.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Hannah. Over to you, Katerina, on maximizing synergies and avoiding fragmentation, duplication, as Hannah mentioned.
Yes, I love this topic, of course, because as I work with systemic approach, synergy is a must, and actually the complexity that I was mentioning before, it's a big challenge, because we need, you can't make a change by yourself. This is really the base, and we need to create the synergies, because nobody has the knowledge to cross all the bridges that have to be, made. So I think it is essential to this is the part that I also love the most about my job, is that you have to always, every project we make is always about sitting together at the table, like different disciplines getting together and then pulling, and then okay, I need this, yes, but I do need this. And then we have to compromise. We have to, get to a solution that gets everyone agree on something, so you're not going to get 100% of what you were hoping, but you are going to, you're not going to go forward only in one direction, because as we know, we can't just focus on one topic, the nexus, for instance. If we're talking about the water, energy, food nexus, if you pull on water, food is gonna resent. So it's always about compromising. Another thing is, and I speak also because I work here in the Dominican Republic, where there is a lot of fragmentation. So I think it's really important to make existing initiatives visible. Here, everybody, I don't want to be too general, but everybody is just starting something new, but there is already a lot to build on top. So I think make existing initiatives visible, and also enhance like all the platforms where we can share knowledge, because it's very important in order to, when we're thinking about a solution in the DR, then we can look at other contexts, similar contexts or similar needs, and then similar challenges, and then, hey, how did they solve this in Colombia or in other countries, and then we can adapt. It's key. I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to invent technologies, but I can adapt existing technologies to the context where I'm working. And the last point that I want to make is that it's fundamental, in my opinion, to empower people in the sense that everybody has to be, and also I'm talking about young people and vulnerable people, let's say. It's important that they are aware that they have a big responsibility in the change, So many times I see here that people rely on the government. This is not going to work here because we don't have a legal framework. This is not about only legal framework. Half of the job is made from our own homes and our own habits. So we need to empower people and make them aware that they are a big part of the change from a bottom-up perspective.
Absolutely. I love that thought of ensuring that the whole of society is empowered to make these changes. So Saad, you briefly mentioned avoiding fragmentation, but how can the Youth for Capacity initiative effectively complement and support existing youth-led actions being taken to enhance synergies?
Definitely. You see, as I always say, being inclusive and welcoming is the hard choice. It's easy usually for stakeholders, UN agencies, governments to just stick with one or two youth organizations on the national level or whatever, and be like, yeah, those people are working well, those are our partners, and that's it. But it's harder to go to the ground, make people identify what are the different actors, youth actors, individuals, organizations, work on uniting them, on involving them, and providing the space, as colleagues says, to make the synergy happen, bring people from different backgrounds and see how they can work together. That is the hard choice, and it takes determination, it takes good values to do that. So having this as a priority, which is making sure we want to include as many people as we can, it is hard. So the way forward is, once we decide on that as a principle for us, we make sure to make sure we have a system in each local and national level where young people are being united, working together, and from there is a synergy, and there are contact persons which will facilitate that conversation with between the program and with young people. So that's very important, so that when you share, you are being inclusive and you have young people there, and also showing and getting these principles to young people themselves, that okay, it's not about yourself. And we have this African proverb that I always quote, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. It's easy for young people to just do things alone. But then if you are able to transmit those principles and tell them or the importance on working together and doing things together, being it hackathons and joint work in solutions to develop solutions as a group, or it can be teams that are from multiple backgrounds or multiple local level or expertise or whatever. So leading that and transmitting those principles to young people is important, and we have a role to do that, so that you can always kind of incentivize people working together and joining hands to work together. So that's how we can work with young people to ensure synergies, and maybe to also focus on that, having platforms, and that's on the technical level where people can access and communicate and like exchange with each other. It can be social media platforms, it can be special platforms, either online or in person, where people can easily communicate and have access to a database, to the list of people existing. And being a global actor, we have a big role to create such platforms where we can bring young people together, and they have the accessibility to easily find, identify, and communicate with peers. So that's a big role for us as well, to create those spaces for youth.
Perfect. I mean, what a great place to end. Make the hard choice. I'd like to remind all of our participants to please send your Q&A into the chat, because we will have a discussion where the panelists will answer your questions. But a huge, huge thank you to all our panelists for showcasing your work around building and retaining youth capacities and unlocking youth potential for climate action and implementation. I'll now pass on to Alejandro to continue today's session.
Thank you very much, Natalie, for giving the floor, and I'm very happy about the excellent conversations during the panel, and thank you to all the speakers for such a fruitful discussion. My name is Alejandro Kilpatrick. I'm the manager of the UNFCCC Capacity Building Subdivision, and I will be moderating this open plenary discussion, which we will have to keep a bit shorter because the panel took a bit more time than planned, but we'll still get a very good interaction, I'm certain. During this open plenary discussion, all participants can share their insights with regards young people's role as capacity builders and recipients, as well as their insights on how young people can be empowered as agents of change in co-creating climate action and supporting implementation. For this segment, we will be using the interactive tool Mentimeter. Participants can access Menti, this tool, by scanning the QR code shown on the slide, or going directly to the link menti.com and using the code that you can also see on your screen, and I think it's also been posted on the chat. So whilst responding to the Menti questions, participants are also invited to deliver brief interventions on the floor. If you wish, when requesting the floor, please enter in the chat box the word intervention, your name and organization, or use the raise hand function. Please remember to keep your interventions concise so that everybody can have a chance to speak. But like I mentioned, we are running a bit late, so we might take a reduced number of interventions. So now we're ready to go to the interactive segment. So we have this screen with the first question of the Menti. So the question is, as you see it, what is your experience with youth focus or youth-led capacity building initiatives? Please share your responses directly in the app and the menti.com. So let's give colleagues a bit of time to start providing their inputs in Menti. In the meantime, if there's anyone who wants to take the floor, please do by saying intervention or writing intervention in the chat or raising your virtual hand. But I see that there are already some responses coming into the Menti. So yeah, based on this question, experiences on youth focus, youth-led capacity initiatives, So some people have had not experience, but I see a request from the floor from Jim Tanaka. Please go ahead.
Okay, thanks much. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, okay, thanks much. So this is Jin from Japan as a member of the Yango and the member of the major group of children youth for the taking some initiative in the UN General Assemblies. And that time, based on my experience, the youth focus or youth capacity building initiative, we need to have some acknowledgement and the cross-border and cross-sector collaboration with the government, companies, and civil society organizations. Likewise, as some of the members have mentioned about the experience or some kind of some discussion or something like that. And that time maybe it's based on my experience, we need to focus on the more opportunities to share and to deliver the voice of the youth to include to take some initiative and to cultivate some capacity building for each of the areas and each of the caucus areas. So that's my point. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Jean. Thanks for your contribution. And I see already some other opinions in the mentees about people that say that youth initiatives are often very well organized, although there's a perception that they might not be so organized. An interesting comment about this emotional disconnect of youth with climate issues. But please feel free to continue asking, putting your inputs into Menti. And again, if there is someone who wants to take the floor, please either raise your hand or just write intervention in the chat. Okay, I don't see any requests for the floor. We have a couple of additional questions in Menti, and we have some responses now coming in, very driven, but struggle for resources. I think that we heard that youth-led initiatives are very driven, but still lack resources, and it's good that this comes out because it goes back to the points about how to collaborate with other initiatives and maximize impact. It's the example from Liberia. So thank you very much for sharing your example. I'm aware of time, so I think we can take a couple of more in the Mentimeter, or maybe just another intervention, either by raising your hand or writing it into the chat box. Okay. Also, please, if you're not taking the floor, please turn off your microphones. Okay, let's move to the second question. The Mentimeter. So how can the Youth for Capacity initiative, this initiative that my colleagues have described, can address the most significant capacity needs and gaps of young people? So please, looking forward to your insights on this second question. Again, work on multiple levels, okay. So I think that was part also of the panel discussions that we need to take a look of the engagement of, for example, the level of the private sector, young entrepreneurs, involving governments, and all relevant actors, creating opportunities, engaging young people as co-creators and equal partners in the process. I think that was mentioned also, and that's one of the main premises of this Youth for Capacity initiative, that young people are co-creators and equal partners. Continental and country needs, yes. Don't work with those who need it more. Outreach, that's a very important point. Engage more youth. I think that's similar to what we heard. Matchmaking and collaborations and amplifying synergies. Whole of society approaches. Thank you very much. Anyone who would like to take the floor, or raise your hand, or write it down in the chat? Okay, we're getting more responses. That's very encouraging, because we really want to hear from young people and to make the best of this Youth for Capacity initiative. Train the trainers. I think goes back to the principle that youth can be both recipients but also providers of capacity building. Grounding practical uses, focus on actionable capacity building. I think that's a key word, actionable capacity building, in terms of really addressing needs and being capacity building activities that are owned by the recipients. Okay. I think also in the benefit of time, maybe let's move forward. So, because we have another segment for this talk. So thank you everyone for your active engagement. You can still provide inputs to the Menti, will be still active. And I really hope this segment has provided some additional insights into young people's roles as capacity builders and recipient, as well as how young people can be empowered as agents of change in climate action and implementation of, in this case, the Paris Agreement. I will now pass the floor to my colleague Shihan, who will moderate the question and answer sessions coming up next. Shihan, over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Alejandro, and all participants for your engagement during the open plenary session. My name is Zihan Shen. I'm part of the UNFCCC Capacity Building Subdivision as an intern, and I'm very excited to also be moderating a very quick Q&A session due to time constraints. So the chat is now open for questions or requests to take the floor. As usual, please use the Teams Q&A function and enter your question, and you can use the following format: intervention-name and organization to put your intervention in the chat. So any questions that you would like to raise, especially if directed to the panelists on what they have shared during the panel discussion just now, you can feel free to use the Q&A function and we will get to it shortly. So I will now give a couple of minutes just for colleagues to put their questions in the chat and then hand it to the panelists if possible.
You have a calling asking for an intervention, Shihan. Calling from
Great,
BBC.
thank you. Great, thank you very much. Just one moment, I'm just opening the chat. So first, I'd like to give the time to Colin Spurway from BBC for your intervention. Please go ahead.
Hi, Shihan, thanks. And thank you all for the comments that have been made so far. I'm really interested in the areas that the experts on the panel have highlighted, but the concern I have with all issues related to the climate crisis is the question of scale. The challenge is so huge, and the areas of understanding you're talking about are so complex that I think we need to be really changing our modalities for interventions in a way that reflects the scale of the challenge. If you're looking at things like Katerina's raised about complex issues like the circular economy, or Hannah talked about climate financing, these are fundamental to young people or formerly young people like me understanding how to make any contribution. But when you're looking at a world of 7.6 billion people, I don't know, we can't rely on a couple of hundred really well-intended activists to be the ones who attend workshops and learn about these things. UNFCCC and the capacity building work is really vital, but something's also got to get this to literally millions at some level. I mean, you don't need millions of climate finance experts, but you need millions, tens of millions of young people around the world need to get the basics of climate finance so they can hold their leaders to account. The question is, how are you going to do it? Now, I represent the BBC's International Development Charity, so I have my own views, but I don't want to sort of present. That's not the point. The point isn't to suggest necessarily work with the BBC, but I wonder what the panel are thinking of how you can take this to scale. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Colin, for your intervention. If I can give it to Hannah and Katerina on the question about how we scale up climate action and capacity building. Maybe first Hannah and then Katerina.
I'll do my best, Colin. It's a big question and one that I think is important to keep front of mind. You know, we get so involved in like the day-to-day, but this is really the question, right? I completely agree with the need to shift mindsets, and I think you put it really nicely. While you were speaking, I was just reminded of a document I saw go around Twitter the other day from Project Drawdown that said something like, "Your job is a climate job," and it lists out all of these professions and sectors and said, you know, you might not think that you work in climate, but this is how your work is affected and should be, can be better attuned to these topics. And I think that's really where we need to get. And it's not, you know, when we talk about capacity building, I think we can look at programs that have worked and particular efforts, but this really needs to be about everyone building the workforce and the, you know, politicians and the decision makers of the future. So it's young people, yes, especially, but it does have to be accompanied by that mindset shift. And I think it's also helpful for me when I'm thinking about this on this grand scale is to remember that, you know, not everyone is going to be a negotiator or a decision maker or the leader of a company, an entrepreneur, but we also need people building capacities to be like solar technicians. And there are interesting programs happening at university levels. I'm thinking of one particular one in Kenya that are training students to work in this, you know, in the renewable energy workforce. But also we need folks that are looking at monitoring and evaluation and that are, you know, working in accounting, all of these things. And I know I'm repeating things that we all understand, but I think you're right. It is about a mindset and kind of stepping back to the higher level.
Great, thank you very much. Katerina, over to you if you'd like to add on.
Yes, please. I agree totally with Hannah. Students, for instance, the Dominican Republic, I started teaching in architecture school and they had no idea what climate change was. So when I started like a lab about circular economy and urban planning, they were looking at me like I was really, but I think that's essential. So including this into like, let's try to train as many people involved in as many different branches. And I think the main answer to your question, Colin, is that, in my opinion, we have to design strategies that can be put into action step by step. So no panic. I mean, climate action is urgent, but we cannot think about one solution and then it takes 10 years to develop. And then it comes and it's already old. It's an old technology, or there is no. I mean, it's already it's not up to date. And so we need to start with little pilot projects. I mean, we need to have a big vision, large scale vision, as large as possible, made out of millions of small actions. And the key suggestion is flexibility. So when we work with the urban planning, we need to plan flexibility. Things change all the time. So we need to design strategies that can be adapted. I would not say day by day, but maybe monthly, to new needs, to new target people, and new, like a very complex and always changing situation.
Great, thank you so much, Katerina. And just because this question is also so interesting, I wonder if Bruna or Saad would like to weigh in on this question.
Yeah, maybe I can share some reflections from my side. You know, when we talk about scaling, we're talking about a whole society approach, and also, you know, I see a big role for media agencies and, you know, different stakeholders there in the sense of amplifying and sharing what's going on and what's being done. So sharing what the best practices, the good practice, and building on them so that they can be examples to learn from and lessons to learn from. So that's the role of media, sharing and amplifying youth practices. The role of academics to also share and document and work together with youth actors so that whatever action they are doing, it's also documented, measured, monitored, and evaluated. And that's a very good potential for academics to support young activists so that we can have youth engagement in the literature, in the scientific space, and there is a huge potential there as well for scaling. And yeah, finally, networking, as I said, and working together, and collaborations means that we work together, we support each other, and having the values of collaborating and supporting each other in mind as a priority instead of prioritizing personal benefit is a way forward from my side.
Thank you very much, Saad, and over to Bruna if you'd like to add on.
Yeah, just a quick remark to say that, again, I come here with a private sector perspective because we are the only initiative that works directly with the private sector. And we do know that, for example, 70% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, they do come from the private sector organizations. So it's very important to tackle the root cause of the problem whenever we talk about topics related to climate change. So, for example, again, like 1 trillion tons of those greenhouse gas emissions are purely from the private sector. So how do we do this? By building the capacity of those private sector and teaching them why did we end up here and how can we reverse this? And we all know that leading up to the SDG summit this upcoming September, the Secretary General is stepping up and wants to put even more financing to really fight this climate change war that we are currently dealing with. But a very essential thing is to really know who the stakeholders that are involved. And this is where we will really try to tap into the root cause of the climate crisis that we currently live in. So, of course, capacity building is very important, but also when we talk about capacity building, who are we building the capacity for? Like, who are our stakeholders? Who are the people involved? It's not only essential for governments and UN entities to come up with strategies if the main actors are not involved and are not in the game with us. And that's why a part of this accelerator that I just discussed for young professionals, we do have our Climate Ambition Accelerator, where we really teach companies and we guide them on how to lower their emissions and how to really be working within the sustainability sphere of climate change, because it's a really important topic. And science is on our side in 2022, and we need to use this to benefit climate change instead of just adding more risks and more consequences to this war. Again, this is something that the term that we very much use right now to just really talk about the urgency of this topic, because it's tapping into other aspects of our work and not just the climate in general.
Thank you very much. And I give the time back to Colin if you'd like to add 30 seconds of comment.
Okay, thank you. These are all really good ideas. I think, however, we're fairly limited to a fairly traditional understanding of what capacity building is. We're talking about sort of workshops and certificates and things like that, and that is a large part of it. I think we need to be looking at tools like YouTube to make sure that those sorts of training arrangements can be done at massive scale, which of course we now know can be achieved. But I think we should also consider, as capacity building, lower scale interventions for larger groups of people. If, for example, you look at things like telenovelas and movies, if you had a telenovela or a soap opera, one of the big Korean dramas, whose central character was super hot and aspirational and wonderful, but she runs a circular economy company. Through the course of that, her audience gets to know what the circular economy is, but they don't have to sit down and sign up to a course on the circular economy. They just follow the super hot Korean star or the Brazilian latest entrepreneur. They feature entrepreneurs and people doing brilliant work, but it could be an architect working in the circular economy. And I just wonder if UNFCCC and these sorts of structures are thinking to reach out to those sorts of tools that really operate at the scale of the millions. But thank you. Enough from me. On to someone else. Thanks for Thanks for your attention. Goodbye.
Thank you very much for your intervention and also for the panelists. I think it's a very important question of how we can mobilize different sectors to catalyze climate action. I now pass the time to David Kindo Kamara, if you'd like to take an intervention and ask your questions to the panelists. David, if you're able to unmute yourself.
Thank you for the platform. Nevertheless, it's very educative and fruitful ideas have been passed over. But I was wondering, what are the mechanisms that have been put in place to cater for gender balance and sustainability, and also for inclusiveness in terms of disabilities and the likes in place?
Great, thank you.
Because we need everyone.
Apologies if my internet is cutting off a little bit, but I think your question was about how to ensure gender inclusiveness in the climate action capacity building that we engage in. And if that's all right, I also turn the time to the panelists, maybe starting with Bruna this time, if you'd like to add on to that. Bruna, if you can hear us, you can respond to the question. But if not, then I see Hannah and Katerina also here. Hannah and Katerina, if you'd like to add on to that question about creating an inclusive environment for climate action.
I can just add a quick intervention. I think, David, this is a fantastic question. Thank you for raising it. It's really, really important as we make these kind of large commitments and put a lot of effort into these, that we're not repeating biases that have happened in the past. And I think this applies to everything we've talked about today, whether it's workforce development or policy creations. There are, some frameworks that exist. Countries have kind of national gender policies that talk about gender balance and equality. We have the SDGs as ultimate goals. Some of these topics are baked into countries' NDCs as well. But I think this, it's a large challenge, and it needs to be always at the forefront of folks who are planning interventions and policies and programs, because this is something that continuously needs to be reinforced and reminded and brought up, so we don't, perpetuate biases and inequalities.
Thank you very much, Hannah. And Katerina or Bruna, if you'd like to add on.
Yeah, I think, as I was saying earlier, I think we have to target, we have to think about how to include women, for instance, as ambassadors, so if we are planning some educational program, then we should, in the case of household waste, I was saying, so this is a great opportunity because women are in charge of it, so they can be the first one to know how to sort their waste, and then they will be suddenly like in charge of this, and this creates empowerment in the community, and when we are designing community gardens, so I think there's many ways to include women as leading figures in circular economy. Or in climate action, let's say. I think don't forget that circular economy creates also new jobs, new know-how, and these should be targeted to vulnerable parts of the city, let's say. That's why I work with informal settlements, for example, and overall women and kids.
Thank you very much, Katerina. Bruna or Sat, if you'd like to end off.
I would just like to add a very minor comment on Katerina's introduction. That is very important to include this gender lens in those frameworks. For us, for example, at the Global Compact, we just launched a supply chain framework that really highlights the role of women in business, but also women as one of the main components of the society, and what's the impact of having the circular economy and those sustainable supply chains in this in those frameworks. So I think looking at the frameworks, and apologies, I didn't really listen to the question because my internet was breaking off, but frameworks are in place. We're really seeing more and more frameworks come to life, especially leading up to the September summit again, where we will really take stock of the progress and see what is working, what is not, because those frameworks are not put in place forever. We always have different stakeholders step in and change and update because we live in a world that is ever changing. So this is also another call to action for all the people who want to be involved to really look in their communities and see how the stakeholders in their communities are contributing to those frameworks, to those reports, and to those reviews, and how can they have a voice to play, an active role to play within those stakeholders, and how could those entities in turn transform the voices of youth and any stakeholders who is interested into formal policies that will then go on to governments and formal entities in the future.
Great, thank you so much, Bruna, and for all the panelists for highlighting gender as a cross-cutting issue to be mainstreamed across climate action. And due to time constraints, I know we have some other questions, but we can't get to them at this point. Thank you so much to all the panelists for answering the question, and also to the participants for asking them. I now also have the honor to pass the time back to Natalie Gondo, who will proceed with a short recap of the discussions we have so far. And we do apologize for slightly overrunning today's discussion, but I hope that you can stay with us for the final 5 to 10 minutes. So with that, I'd like to hand the time back to Natalie for a quick recap of today's discussions.
Yeah, so I think what stuck with me was the quote that Saad gave about going together, but I'd like to really share another proverb which says it's too late to learn to swim when the water is up to your lips, and the water really is up to our lips. And we need to ensure that we go together and we don't go alone, and we make sure that we do so on equal footing. And if we do this, we can have a breakthrough for a whole of society transformational shift to allow this bottom-up approach that enables the global shift that we ultimately need. I think I heard a lot about building on the best practices from various capacity building initiatives that unlock young people and other marginalized groups' potentials for climate action, and focus on retaining that capacity and upscaling that capacity. And then, of course, we heard about not undervaluing the value of education. We need to dedicate some space for an educational component because that's really the way that we will stimulate the breakthrough shifts in the way companies think and do business, and in the way that we live and consume. And then, of course, there was the aspect of co-creation. Young people have really made it clear that we are not just beneficiaries, but partners. And that means as we are prioritizing capacity building in NDC action, we need to ensure that young people and other marginalized groups are at an equal playing field. And that should be the focus of the Youthful Capacity Initiative, whether that's through technical capacity, finance, education, resources, time, etc., and make sure that it's applicable to the most vulnerable among us. And, just going back to what one of our other panelists said, you can't make a change by yourself. You need to compromise, and you might not get 100%, but we definitely can do more, and we can make much better change than we're currently making with what we have. So those are my reflections.
Thank you so much, Natalie, for that recap and final reflections. Just being mindful of time, I'd like to hand over the floor to Roberta Iana, senior expert at the Italian Ministry for Ecological Transition, who's supporting the Youthful Capacity Initiative for some closing remarks before we wrap up the session. Over to you, Roberta.
Thank you very much, Eva, and hello, everyone. So we are already out of time, so we'll be very brief and thank very much the Secretariat for focusing this capacity building talk of this year on the Youth for Capacity program and the distinguished panelists for providing such interesting insights on the topic of capacity building. As you may know, Italy hosted last year a Youth for Climate event back-to-back with the pre-COP that we hosted in Milan. And the request for capacity building was actually one of the main asks that came from this Youth for Climate manifesto built by the more than 400 participants that joined the event. But and so it is to respond to this request that together with the UNFCCC Secretariat, we are supporting this Youth for Capacity program. But as many of you already said, as Bruna and Anna already said, we are now already shifting from having young people as recipients of capacity building to be even provider of capacity building and really being partner in the fight and in climate change and on climate action. So the co-creation approach is really what we are looking at in redesigning the Youth for Capacity program, which aims really to amplify, as it has been mentioned, what is already there and making it more visible also in order to scale up climate action. So as some COP presidency of a few years ago said, we are all in the same canoe. So it's time for joining forces. Young people are getting more and more active in climate action, and we definitely need fresh ideas. So this is what the space of Youth for Capacity is meant to be. Let's hope to go far with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Roberta. We indeed need to work together to really mobilizing and building the capacities of young people to co-create these solutions. And we very much look forward to the future of the Youth for Capacity Initiative and to see how these different inputs that we gather today will fit into the design for that. Just be mindful of time, just really a couple of final reminders. We'll be sharing around, if we can go into the next slide, please. We'll be disseminating a recording of this session together with an outcomes article and summary report of the event in case you like to go back to some of the discussions. Mike and Lisa are also going to be sharing a post-event survey in the chat, so we'd very much appreciate for you to fill it out and get your feedback, see how we can improve future talks, or you can scan the QR code on the slides. You're also welcome to join the UN Climate Change Capacity Building Group to stay up to date with just different events and activities and learn more about the Youth for Capacity initiative. And while I still have you all in the room, I just like to thank you all for your engagement and participation, but mostly for our speakers, Katerina, Hannah, Sad, Bruna, Natalie for moderating, Roberta for the intervention, and the CB team for all the support. And really thank you much all. Please do watch out for web pages and social media channels for the next CB talk, which will be hosted on the first half of next year. And